Hey, folks, good evening, and once again, welcome to the strategy session. I am your host, Rick Wilson. I am joined, as always, by my colleagues, Stuart Stevens and the great Joe Trippi. Tonight, we have a very special guest who is going to be able to give us some context on one of the big picture things that's going on right now in the world, and that is this massive propaganda war that we're in the middle of. And sometimes we don't even realize we're in the middle of a massive propaganda war, but we are. Our guest is Julia Davis. She is a journalist, a writer, a broadcaster, a media analyst, and she runs an amazing program called Russian Media Monitor. And she takes the time to watch what the Russian state television folks are saying and interprets it for us in a way that allows us to look at what's behind the propaganda in Russia. What are the messages that they're trying to send by talking about the outcomes in the United States, in our politics, in Ukraine, in Europe, around the world. And I must say, Julia, it sounds to me like the Russian propaganda guys have been having a pretty rough week when their puppet regime in Syria fell. Talk to us about not only where Russia is right now in the world because of all this chaos that they've created for themselves, and about the shape and the scope of Russian intelligence and information operations in their propaganda sphere.
Thank you all for having me here. And I've been watching the Russians really having a good time, because just as they were at their wits' end with the war in Ukraine, not going the way they obviously originally intended, they were quite excited to see Trump win the elections, which they always saw as their way to get all of Ukraine or much of Ukraine without having to fight for it anymore. So there was a widespread celebration, thinking that they have it made. Now all they have to do is make it to January, and they will get all of their conditions met, and they will get to take whatever they wanted. And all of a sudden, that came as a surprise to so many, including them. The Assad regime fell very quickly, and Assad himself ended up in Moscow as their asylum applicant.
Right.
And then in the Russian propaganda sphere, everything turned on a dime, because they have no principles, so they really see no problem changing their perspective. So all of a sudden, it turns out they never even liked Assad.
What? Syria?
Yes, exactly. And they are admitting openly now, yes, so he was a dictator, but they see no problem with that either. Might be a big surprise to Tulsi Gabbard, but their problem with Assad was that he wasn't harsh enough, that he wasn't decisive, what they call decisive, meaning ruthless enough as compared to his father. So they blame him for this downfall. They also suddenly now are talking about how corrupt his regime was, and also blaming that because they said in the military all the victories were secured by their troops, but then all the people that they have trained up were not promoted and not accepted by the Assad regime that promoted its insiders and more on the basis of nepotism and connections. So there again, they were blaming him for the military not being able to foresee this, much less to fight back. And then they also blamed all the other allies, basically anyone but themselves. And they are quite distressed about it. They're still processing the shock of this happening, because their bases in Syria are of paramount importance to them. And I already hear them talking about, even though in their blogosphere, their bloggers are saying that the bases are already being evacuated and they're moving their equipment and their troops, but on their state television, they're refuting that. And they're saying that they had a deal with Assad for 49 years that they would be able to have their bases there, and they're expecting the new government to honor it. Funny enough. Yes.
Good luck.
Yes. And what they're planning to do is to either bribe them by promising the same level of support that Assad enjoyed, because they really don't care who's in charge there as long as they get to keep their presence and their pool and their bases there. So they're saying they will promise to give them everything they gave to Assad, and in exchange they want to stay there, and or otherwise they will resort to threats and to bombing them with their missiles, and so these are the two ways that they're contemplating, but they're assuring the population that all the enormous money and manpower that they've spent on Syria will not have been in vain, and that they're not planning to leave.
Well, it's interesting to me because the folks I talked to in the region over the weekend, and some smart folks pointed out to me that this was their critical refueling base to get down into their various activities in Africa that they're up to. It was their safest way to get to blue water in the Mediterranean for their fleet and to refuel and restock their fleet. And that seems to be very much in the rearview mirror for them at the moment, which I'm here for. Stuart, you look like you wanted to ask a question there for a second ago.
Yeah, Julie, I was just curious. How do you think this is going to impact the war in Ukraine? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, they actually are saying that the very reason that they did not help the Assad regime to remain standing is because they are too busy in Ukraine.
Right.
Their forces are already stretched thin. Their economy is faltering, and they don't have any manpower to really to spare to send more people to Syria. So, which is why they're trying to figure out the way to threaten their way to stay there on the same basis that they had with Assad. But this will certainly be a distraction. And actually, what they're talking about is, with this being as much of a humiliation and distraction as it is, they want to distract the world from it now. So they're contemplating resorting to something so horrific that everyone will stop talking about what just happened in Syria. So I think this is a particularly dangerous time period right now, because Putin doesn't like being humiliated. So he might do something particularly horrific in Ukraine. Or their other thing they're constantly talking about is, while they're talking to people like Tucker Carlson, which they think is great, they say he was able to spread his propaganda straight to Americans. So they're saying what we need to do as Americans is smile in their face and stick it in their back. So they're talking about attacking our bases, attacking our ships, our military facilities all over the world. So that's definitely something that they're contemplating to distract from their humiliation and to try to put the United States in its place, as they say.
Joe?
I'm just wondering how you see, with the changing administrations now with Trump, how you see that affecting what's going on in Ukraine and Syria, or if there's any way for you to know or to forecast.
It's basically impossible to read the tea leaves at this point, but I can tell you the way the Russians are perceiving it. This was another shock to them that was pretty close to the Syria shock, is when Trump started to write those, what they called mean tweets, where he was glad about what happened in Syria, where he put the number of their casualties out there on display, which is really a sore spot for them. They never talk about that. So all of a sudden they started to say, well, don't expect that Trump is going to be so wonderful, because apparently he's not good at math and doesn't have a good grasp of reality. So who really knows what happens there? They initially anticipated that he would just show up and accept all of their conditions. And they're very encouraged by what Elon Musk and Trump's son are posting online, mocking Zelensky, mocking Ukraine constantly. So they're always wondering just how much of a pull their position on Ukraine will have on Trump. And they're hoping that it will be sizable. But they're very angered by these tweets that he sent out, and getting kind of this caught them. This was like a cold shower for them to see
Right.
Trump saying what he was saying. So it'll be interesting because they both have oversized egos. And I think that Trump made his offer, or some kind of an offer towards the Russians, to stop this, like he said, in 24 hours, which was completely unrealistic and delusional. And I'm sure Putin bristled at that and told him there's no way this is going to happen. And these are our demands. And that may be why Trump is now sending those tweets that they dislike so much. So they also said that Tucker Carlson is not really going there for as much for the interviews as he is passing messages back and forth. So perhaps those messages were not as friendly as they had hoped. So it'll certainly be unpredictable. That much is for sure.
Tucker Carlson as a messenger for Donald Trump and Putin. What could go wrong?
What could possibly go wrong? Hey, Julia, I'm curious. One of the things that you had some stuff about on Russian Media Monitor was the delight that the Russians experienced when Trump named Tulsi Gabbard as his nominee to be Director of National Intelligence. Talk to us a little bit about why they're so excited about Tulsi Gabbard, and give us some more perspective on how overjoyed they are at the thought of her being at the head of all American intelligence operations.
I've started monitoring and reporting on their infatuation with Tulsi, which seems to be mutual, for years. And it was quite obvious that they were focused on her, calling her Putin's agent and their girlfriend. And they really appreciated all the messages that she was sharing that were in total alignment with what they're saying. And now this recent report that she's a regular consumer of RT's reporting and has been sharing it with her friends and colleagues, that also really brought a lot of joy to Russia, which they may have known this all along. That much I'm not aware of, but they are completely delighted that Tulsi Gabbard may end up in that position. As a matter of fact, they are expecting that all the remaining Trump nominees will be able to get in despite their scandalous, issues with their character and the way they see the world, because they say that there is no Republican Party anymore. This is just the party of Trump, and they will all fall in line and do whatever he says. So they see this as pretty much in the bag. And Tulsi is a figure that they're thrilled about because she's delivering all the talking points that they like to say, and has supported Assad and Russia, and basically advocated for the United States not to stand on the side of good, but just stand aside and mind its own business. That's exactly what they want us to do, to just be so busy with our own internal squabbles that we don't look their way. They get to get away with everything that they're doing. And they think that Tulsi delivering what she considers to be important to Trump will be ideal, because he doesn't have that much of an independent knowledge about intelligence community, about the world at large, and whatever she puts in front of him will be what he will consume and run with. So they couldn't be more excited. And they're equally as excited about Kash Patel, because they believe that, just as he said, he will be arresting Trump's enemies. They're especially excited that he will be arresting journalists. They are talking about this on multiple state TV programs. They cannot wait for him to arrest American journalists, because they see this as a way that the American media will finally be subdued and will not be, power to reckon with. And that way they will get to insert their points of view into the media, and there will be no one to oppose them.
That is kind of an amazing conceit on their part, is that for the first time they've got the potential to have people in power who will make American media look a lot more like their idea of what media should be like, which is to serve the state, serve the dear leader, not to report news or provide real legitimate perspectives. I want to ask you a little bit so people understand that the continuity of all of the media outlets that exist today in Russia that are still able to broadcast, able to be on the public airwaves, or able to be seen by Russians. These are all a part of a constellation of Russian government-controlled enterprises and organizations. When people hear RT or Sputnik, they shouldn't think, oh, this is a private company like NBC or Fox or ABC or CNN. These are all part of the Russian government's program of internal and external propaganda. Explain to folks how thoroughly that system is integrated and how different it is from what Americans might think.
It is completely different from what we have here. For one thing, no one there on their state media is ever allowed to criticize Putin. They literally will not say one word to ever criticize him, as opposed to what we have here, where any president could get dragged for anything that they do, and no one is afraid to do it. That is impossible there, completely impossible. They operate according to the same set of talking points that are disseminated to all of these channels, which they are supposed to stand by. And no matter how ridiculous the change might be from day to day, they all go for it. You can basically watch them and trace it exactly, what they were told to say about a certain topic on a certain day. And one of the shows that I regularly feature on Russian Media Monitor was Vladimir Solovyov.
Right.
He was very thrilled when it was brought up on air that Putin regularly watches it. And what does that tell you? On that show, they regularly threaten the United States and other Western countries with nuclear weapons. They talk about how they own Trump. They talk about how they endorse his nominees. Basically, and also not to forget about Ukraine, a central issue there as well is that there's a flood of genocidal messages there talking about Ukrainians, that Ukraine needs to be destroyed, how they need to be exterminated, comparing them to insects and animals. And so all of that is not only government endorsed, it's Putin endorsed, obviously, because he regularly watches it and he never tells them to stop doing it. So that gives you a very good idea of what the Kremlin wants to be spread out there, what he wants the Russian people to believe. So it is a very good look into, it's not necessarily the truth. As a matter of fact, most of the time it's far from truth, but it gives you a good idea of what what Putin wants people to believe.
Right.
So with what's happening with the fragmentation here of our media, with Elon Musk taking X, how deep is their ability in terms of infiltrating our message? I mean, they're getting their propaganda into U.S. citizens, and how impactful has that increased over time, or are they even more methodical about it?
It has definitely increased over time, and head of our team, Margarita Simonyan, often brags about it, that when they were blocked from our TV networks and from our social media, that's when they expanded into this empire of covert projects. And I'm sure all of you have heard of them paying insane amounts of money to bloggers that I've frankly have never even heard of before the stories broke, but they were paying them to spread these talking points on their behalf. And unfortunately, even after that was discovered, I don't think they've even lost their audience, which by now has been brainwashed with these messages where they don't truly understand what is going on in the world, and they're seeing Ukraine, the victim, as the bad guy, and the United States as the bad guy for supposedly prolonging the war, as opposed to defending Ukraine from what Russia is doing. So they have been very proactive, and what's happening with X is certainly helping them, because there is not really a good system in place anymore to to control when there's blatant disinformation being put out there. So they're enjoying it. And as a matter of fact, I would not be surprised if under Trump, RT is restored on our social media and maybe is even allowed to ask questions during our briefings, because this seems to be like this is a direction where it's all going.
Julia, somebody posted a question that is very interesting. What do you think the point of Russians going with these nude pictures of Melania a couple of weeks ago? I mean, is there any logic to this, or do you have a take on this? What were they thinking?
Absolutely, it's perfect logic. They hate us, they despise us, and they're enjoying it. That these are the kind of people that are not. That's now our first lady, our returning first lady, and so they're kind of rubbing our noses into it, and they're by comparison they're making themselves seem holier than thou. They're also reminding Trump that they don't respect him. They don't fear him. They anticipate he will go along with whatever they're demanding for whatever their reasoning is behind the scenes. So that was the message. And they always like to talk about the decadent West and about how we have the
that's
kind
some
of
greatest hits from the Soviet era.
Exactly, and that has never changed. That's one thing. They were so surprised that a few years ago, they were so surprised to hear that the West thinks that they won the Cold War, because in their mind it never stopped, it never ended, and they never stopped having that same line that they're pursuing towards us.
Right. So, Julia, as Putin has struggled with the 3-day military operation that's now well into its third year, he seems to have stressed Russia to a very difficult breaking point with the population. They're now taking much younger men and much older men to fight in Ukraine. They've got the North Koreans fighting. They're bringing people in from Africa. They were importing people from Mali by plane, transshipping them through Syria up to fight in Ukraine. He has clearly dragged this thing out to a limit where they're low on manpower, and it seems to have stressed the country to a pretty far to the edge. Where is the limit for Putin? What is the thing that breaks the people around him? Then finally they go, okay, enough, boss, we're done. You can't do this anymore. And somebody throws him out a window or deposes him or says, go live in your dacha or go live in your mansion somewhere, in the best case. What is it that finally breaks the will of the people around him?
Well, the people around him really don't get a say, and this is how he gets to keep prolonging it, because he really doesn't care what anybody thinks that disagrees with him. And so the chances are slim to none that anyone will ever dare to rebel against him. You saw what happened with Yevgeny Prigozhin, which, by the way, we were talking about Syria earlier. That reminded me of Prigozhin, who said that what they did in Syria was to pull the wool over everybody's eyes by making it look like the Russian army was capable, when in reality it was just them, and he had no respect for the Russian army, and for a good reason. You could see what's happening in Ukraine right now. But as long as they still have some resources, and now they are refueling their human resources with these foreign fighters, they're still selling their everything that they could sell. There are still countries that are doing trade with them. So unfortunately, that's helping him stay afloat. So if those resources dwindled, or for example, if we had a long time ago allowed Ukraine to start striking with long-range missiles and hitting them where it hurts, where they could, where Ukraine could start depleting Russian military capacities, and also sending them, a more serious message, then that would have more of an impact. But the mindset there is that all they have to do is just persevere, because the West will always blink first. They see it as the West having no stomach to keep this going indefinitely. And look at what we're witnessing right now. The incoming administration says that we're tired of it. This is music to Russia's ears. This is when they think all they have to do is just hang on to that point in time, and then the West will hand it all to them just to get rid of it, just to get it over with. And this has been keeping them going.
Julia, is it fantastical to think that what happened in Assad? I mean, it's like, what was the famous Hemingway quote about going bankrupt?
Slowly, then all at once.
Then all at once. Is it? I mean, there was that moment when Prigozhin was marching on Washington, Moscow, when it looked like something. I mean, how fantastical is it to think that we may wake up at some point in the not 10 years from now, but some point in the foreseeable future, and this will be happening inside Russia with Putin? Is this just impossible, do you think, the way the system is organized? And
the system is certainly organized to prevent it and not allow it. But there again, one of the things that I often say is that it's Russia, so anything is possible. So it's definitely not outside the realm of possibility, but the system is set up in a way to where there are multiple roadblocks there. Fortunately for us, they are not very capable, and they're very corrupt. So there again, anything is possible. So it's not outside the realm of possibility.
To what extent do the Russian people understand I understand the propaganda and everything, and that they're locked in state-owned media, but to what extent do they understand what's happening in Ukraine and are not all that worried? It's not as upsetting. It isn't. It's not how we would view it. I mean, are they accepting of it, or they just still have no clue? What's your read on that?
The younger people under 30 have a pretty good grasp of what is really happening. Not that many of them are gung-ho to go and die for Putin, although some are doing it largely for money. And then people over 40, and especially people that are products of the former Soviet Union, they wholeheartedly believe that Russia is on the right side of history, that they are fighting the great Satan, the United States, and the small demon that is Ukraine, that they're fighting against gays and against everything that, they're being told that this is what this war is really all about. They're fighting the decadent West, and they're fighting for their way of life, completely contrary to what is actually happening there. But a lot of them are brainwashed enough to believe it, and then some of them believe it simply because it's easier that way, because if they didn't believe it, then they would have to do something about it, and there's nothing that they can or want to do to rebel against Putin's regime. So it's just easier to believe that they're suffering and dying for the right cause. So the state media is certainly organized in the way to where it completely brainwashes them, and they actually purposely show clips from our media coverage just in order to ridicule them and try to refute them, because they know that people have VPNs at home and they can access that same information. So they're trying to hammer at it from both sides.
Well, Julia Davis, I want to thank you so much for joining us tonight on the strategy session. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
We could probably go on this for a lot longer, but I am very grateful for the work you do every day to enlighten Americans and the world about just how twisted and strange the funhouse mirror of Russian propaganda is, and just how much we need to be alert for its emergence and its presence here in the United States of America. So with that, Julia, I want to thank you so much. Stuart and Joe, thank you. Folks, listen to That Trippy podcast here on Resolute Square. You can also catch My MA's new show, Punching Up, Decoding Fox News, and of course, my podcast, The Enemies List, and the Lincoln Project podcast. We look forward to talking to you guys again next time. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
And follow Julia Davis on Blue Sky.
Yes, follow Julia Davis.
And
Thank you so
Thanks,
much.
Julia.
Thank you. Greatly appreciate all of you.
See you soon, guys.
Thanks.